don't think they're going to make it back in the next minute because there's about 5 minutes between votes. We'll go ahead and get started and walk through some of the bios because I want to make sure that we have time to kind of get into the depth of this discussion of why it's important. And as we talk about name, image, and likeness, we're certainly honored to have other representatives, and certainly feel very grateful that Senator Romney would take time, and obviously somebody with that kind of background and running, really revitalizing the Winter Olympics. We look forward to hearing his comments and thoughts on this as well. So maybe let's go ahead and we'll start with that. I'll come back to the representatives as well. But Jill Briggs will start and with you, and maybe sharing a few thoughts there. We'll give you a quick bio there. Some of you may know that Mr. Briggs serves as the Public Policy Legal Counsel at the NFL Players Association. In his role, he raises awareness about the union's issues on Capitol Hill. Probably realizing why you need a face and a voice here. Very important, does a great job. He also works on local, state, and with federal elected officials. And Mr. Briggs was recently named as one of the country's most influential lobbyists. I guess that's a good thing, actually, for 2019 by lawyers of color. And some of you may know he went to TCU. He's a Horned Frog, I believe. Is that correct? And okay. And we've got a couple guys here that actually former baseball coach is one of the members here from Texas there. And he also, I believe, he played 4 years there as well. So, Mr. Brooks, would you share a little bit about this? We'll kind of go around the room and get some thoughts, and then open up. We'll want to get the bios in, and we'll open up for discussion. Okay.
Certainly. First, I won't take as much time as I've been allotted. I would simply say, as an advocate for players everywhere, I thank you very much for the effort. Thank you for inviting us to be here to have a word with you today. While I represent professional athletes and work with the other players associations on behalf of those professional athletes, I fully recognize as a former college athlete how important this conversation is. I also recognize that many of these former and current college football players will become members of the NFL Players Association in the future. We do everything we can to not only protect their rights, but also help them monetize those rights once they become professional athletes. Knowing that that thing that they use, their likeness and image, has value is something that's very important to us, and it's something that's very important to the sports industry as a whole. While we don't have a voice specifically with college athletes, we only represent those guys that are pursuing an NFL player contract. We do think that this is a very important conversation. We've done a lot on the state level to try to help fight for these rights to be not only instilled in state law, but also spread the word amongst those college athletes that these are things that they should care about and also continue to value as they move through their professional career, move through their college ranks. The conversation is so important that we thought not only to be here as the NFL Players Association, but we brought two young guys with us, Mr. Jake McGee and Mo. So Mo and Jake are two guys who played very big-time college football and have played in the National Football League and are now in a fellowship program with the NFL Players Association, helping with their transition after their NFL careers are done. Their likeness and image have value. We want to make sure that that's something that we talk about today. I'm happy to not only join this conversation, but continue to push this conversation forward.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs, and welcome, Jim, and glad to have you. Dr. Lopiano, is it Lopiano? Okay, I makes the O say its name, and my grammar teacher was correct. So, Dr. Lopiano, we're glad to have you. Dr. Lopiano is the president of Sports Management Resources, a sports management consulting firm. She is also an adjunct professor of sports management at Southern Connecticut State University, formerly served as the University of Texas at Austin's director of women's athletics for 18 years. So she's definitely been involved here, and the CEO of the Women's Sports Foundation for 15 years. She has been nationally and internationally recognized for her leadership as an athletics administrator and her work advocating for gender equity in sports. It's a privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you. First, kudos to Representative Walker for taking the shot across the bow of the NCAA and forcing them to establish a committee to look at the NIL issue. Besides the 12 states out there now that are in the process of filing NIL legislation, or like California, having actually filed it and passed it, there is a need for federal attention to this matter. So a lot of kudos to Representative Walker. I'm also the president-elect of the Drake Group, and I'm here to tell you that if any athletic administrator or the president of the NCAA says that this cannot be done, it is poppycock. Excuse my French. But Drake released a position statement yesterday that actually showed an example of how it could be done. How the NCAA could retain its current, the NCAA and member institutions could retain their current practice of requiring as a condition of athletic participation that the athlete assign their NIL to the institution for athletic events at that institution. That can stay as is. We can also keep that part that says the only thing that institutions need to do is to pay athletes in educational coin. Athletes can also be told, if you don't want to give us your NIL, then you don't have to play collegiate sports. All those things can be kept. And athletes who choose to play collegiate sports can now have the doors open to them to exploit their own NILs and to engage in outside employment that has been prohibited to date. And key to that puzzle is restricting the use of those athletes' rights to, in the case of the institution, the regular season, the championship season, beginning of practice, to postseason play, and all other time periods outside of that, the athletes having the rights like any other student to exploit their own NILs, conditioned only on two things. One, that they not use the name, brand, or affiliation with their institution, and two, the current rule that no representative of athletics interest or the institution can arrange for such things to happen, which means the athlete gets an agent, educates himself or herself as a business person, and engages in the same kind of conduct that we allow other students to engage in. And last, just one mention of, I was asked to say something, why does the NCAA need to be reformed? Mark Everett told 1,000 conference members yesterday that the NCAA was like a homeowners association, and that the homeowners association knew best what needed to be done for homeowners. I'm a member of a homeowners association, and what's best is in the best financial interest of the homeowners. And the NCAA has not put as primary the best interest of the student athlete, the best educational interest of the student athlete, the best health interest of the student athlete, and we have to say that out front. And I would, lastly, I would remind President Emmerich that homeowners associations historically were formed to discriminate on the basis of race and ethnicity.
Thank you for the points and the passion on getting this strong by Mr. Solomon of Aspen Institute is the editorial director of the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program, whose mission is to convene leaders, facilitate dialogue, and inspire solutions that help sports serve the public interest. Prior to the Aspen Institute, Mr. Solomon was an award-winning sports journalist and covered college football and NCAA issues, including the debate over college athlete compensation. Mr. Solomon, would you give us a few introductory remarks?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. The NCAA's at a crossroads again over college athlete pay. What I'd say is different about this threat to the NCAA model is there's significant interest from the government, both state and federal. There's now widespread support for allowing name, image, and likeness rights, led by California becoming the first state to allow athletes to profit. About a dozen other states have shown interest in creating similar laws. And as we'll discuss today, there's also proposed federal legislation. So what's changed? I think what's changed is politicians realize this is quickly becoming a winning issue with the public. According to a recent Seton Hall University poll, 60% of adults endorse the idea of NCAA athletes capitalizing off their NIL. Today, profiting off NIL is especially popular with the 18 to 29-year-old crowd, with 80% supporting the idea. Even half of those who are 60 and older are on board. There are very few things in politics that we've seen in Washington, D.C. that are bipartisan. This actually tends to be one that is, which is pretty fascinating. Leaders in college sports right now are behind the public. According to a recent survey by Athletic Director U, 47% of Division I athletic directors oppose giving athletes the chance to profit off their own name, while 44% support it. When you talk privately to athletic directors and conference commissioners, as I have, many of them say college sports' multi-billion-dollar industry is filled with hypocrisies that makes this model difficult to maintain forever. Many acknowledge that allowing NIL rights is doable and perhaps even inevitable. But there's also fear about what may come from opening the door, particularly as it relates to boosters providing endorsements for recruiting purposes. The NCAA is currently studying NIL through a working group. Some college sports administrators privately say that they think the danger for the NCAA right now is it can lose valuable leverage in the future if it doesn't find common ground for realistic rules right now that benefit athletes and perhaps preserve basic tenets of the college model. It's becoming clear that the government, both state and federal, are interested in change, as is the public. The NCAA could have a role in shaping what this future model looks like, or it could have changes imposed by the government if proposed laws are passed and survive potential legal challenges. Appreciate you having me here today and look forward to the discussion.
And thank you for those comments. I look forward to kind of unpacking a little bit on the popularity of it and some of the numbers that we're still showing. And a lot of it is depending on how the NCAA's PR is pitching it as for its pay-to-play, et cetera. But I want to come back to it later on once we have some of the bios. Mr. Miles, Richard Miles Sr. Is the CEO and founder of the nation's only professional minor league for football. Miles created the Minor Football League, MFL, in 1993 to serve youth in the Washington, D.C. area. The MFL was established to provide a platform for athletic participation, training, and skills development outside of the college and the professional sports arena. Mr. Miles.
Thank you very much.
Let that box with it.
Thank you very much. The Nationals had everybody on my throat. Last night, we seen at the same time. But I want to thank you for this opportunity and you taking this initiative, something that's really been overdue a long time ago. I mean, these are something should have been addressed a long time ago in terms of student athletes. And I just want to say that the fact that we do. I know when I was in school, scholarship was one thing, but it never took care of all the things that you needed to take care of yourself with in terms of washing clothes. If you missed the meal, then you were short there. You couldn't work, you know. So these are some of the things that like I said, excuse my throat, I'm glad that this came to the forefront, and I kind of commend you for this opportunity.
All right, well, great. Thank you again, Mr. Miles. We're glad to have with us Brian Hess. Brian is the Executive Director of Sports Fan Coalition, something that we were looking into recently. Fascinating to hear what you do. It's the nation's leading consumer advocacy organization dedicated to representing fans wherever public policy impacts the games we love. He studied consumer protection at Virginia Tech and received his master's in communication from the University of Oklahoma. That says you're a lifelong DC sports fan. Does that include Redskins as well?
It does. My voice is also hoarse from last night. So thank you everybody for participating. SFC was actually one of the first organizations to endorse the Student Athlete Equity Act when it was first introduced, and we're very grateful to be invited here today to speak more about it. The NCAA, sports apparel companies, media conglomerates, they earn billions of dollars each year off the blood, sweat, and tears of our college athletes. And these college athletes are prevented from receiving any part of that compensation. And we think that's completely unreasonable. When you become a student athlete and you're forced to sign away your likeness, it makes you unable to afford textbooks, as he pointed out, meals, laundry, basic things that we all need, because they don't have time for a second job, let alone their academics. Personally, when I was at Virginia Tech, I was a tutor to student athletes, and the stories that I heard from my students was appalling. The time they had to spend in practice on the field, other team-related activities, never left them any time to even do their homework. On top of that, I was restricted in the ways that I could help them. I was told I wasn't allowed to help do certain things with their homework. They had to have all that done before our tutoring session. I couldn't walk them through the problems. But also, I was prevented from driving them across campus if they got stuck in the rain, because that would be considered a gift on their status, which would, in my opinion, is an unreasonable restriction of their image and likeness. If I'm going to drive my student across campus because it's raining, it's because I'm being polite, and it's a good thing to do for somebody, not because they're a student athlete. So why do fans here care about college athlete compensation, the NIL issue? It's because fans here love our players, and when we provide them the ability to compensate themselves, provide them to have food on their table at night, pay their rent, buy their textbooks. It improves their morale, which improves their performance both on and off the field. And that's something that we all get behind. We want better players, and it starts with them making sure that their lives are taken care of.
Thank you very much, Brian. And we also have Chris Baker, nicknamed Swaggy. All right, is an American football defensive tackle. He played college football at Hampton University, one of the great HBCUs in the country, and was not as good as maybe A&T that I represent, but that's it. It was signed by the Denver Broncos in 2009. Baker had also been a member of the Miami Dolphins, Hartford Colonials, Washington Redskins, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Chris, share word with us.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for, being available to talk about this issue. I was able to go to 2 major colleges. Started off at Penn State, and when we talk about the image and likeness of athletes and us being able to make a little bit of money off that, my roommate was a college athlete, but he was a foster kid. And when we talk about just being able to manage for everyday things that you may have to get, he had a Pell Grant. I'm not sure if everybody understands what Pell Grant is, but you get a certain amount of money. But he did what any 17-year-old or 18-year-old would do. He didn't think conscious like, hey, this $1,700 needs to stretch out for these next couple months. But he went out and bought an iPod. And everyone wanted us to listen to music. And once he bought that iPod, he had no more money left for the rest of the year. So when you talk about you going to the games on Saturdays and Fridays, and everybody's in there with your jersey, and you're working your butt off every single day, and you go out and you get yourself an iPod, but you can't call home. You didn't have any parents to call home and ask for $200-300 just for basic necessities, just to get through the day, even though you're on full scholarship. You know what I mean? So if we're able to make something off of what we do, that's work hard and selling jerseys. Some of the jerseys don't have our names on them, but when you look up in that stand and you see a number 92 jersey or a number 2 jersey, it's you that they're representing. So if we could, get some kickback on that just so we can survive and help our parents come to games. People don't understand that if you go to school in Pennsylvania and your parents live in Florida, it's expensive for them to come to the game and buy a hotel just to come see you play. And then you only get 2 free tickets. So, hopefully we can get some type of help and help us out. We'll be all right.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you being here. Before I get to Chairman Yarmouth and Senator Romney, we are grateful that Mr. Bilas, there's an old saying, I was country before country was cool. Jay Bilas was talking about image and likeness before Mr. Sullivan, before you said that the popularity started to swing this way. It's been something that's authentic. When you talk with him, this is a genuine concern. And there are very few people in this arena who have been willing to get out there and call it for what it is. Mr. Bilas has done that. We're grateful that he's taken the entire day today to come out and bring some attention, not to even a specific piece of legislation, but just the overall concerns of this injustice that's going on for way too long. Jay, would you share a couple thoughts on it?
Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm not here as an advocate for or against any legislation. I'm here because I've been involved in one way or another in college sports since I was 18 years old. And when I was in college in the mid-'80s, I was a member of the NCAA's Long-Range Planning Committee. An open question is whether we did a good job or not, given where we are right now. But I learned very much at that time about NCAA policy and became very educated in policy and followed it and covered it in my job with ESPN ever since. I believe in sports and the power of sports. I also believe in college sports and I believe in education. But I also believe in money. And education and money are not mutually exclusive. You will hear the NCAA say that this is an amateur endeavor and that we don't want to be minor leagues for the pros. I will tell you I disagree with those premises very much. This is not amateur sports. Amateur sports don't make billions of dollars. Amateur sports don't pay their coaches millions of dollars. They don't have multi-billion-dollar media deals and have their games on every single night. And they don't have apparel deals where the players are unpaid billboards for the apparel companies. They are also not minor leagues because minor leagues don't make billions of dollars. They're major league. It's major league sports. And there is nothing wrong with the college athlete monetizing his or her name, image, and likeness, and even beyond. The principle of amateurism that the NCAA claims to hold so dear is literally whatever the NCAA says it is at a given time. And I'll give you an example. 5 years ago, a check to a player for a cost of attendance stipend would be seen as an egregious violation of NCAA rules and the principle of amateurism. Now it falls within the definition of amateurism, and every school is doing it, and the world stays firmly on its axis. Every other person and every other student is allowed to monetize their name, image, and likeness while they're in school, and it does not negatively affect their status as a student. And there's no legitimate reason why athletes should be any different. I've heard a number of different people over the past several days refer to need of athletes. While that's very important, I don't necessarily think this is a need issue. This is a value issue. These athletes have tremendous value. You can tell that value in the marketplace by the fact that the NCAA is fighting so hard to keep them from realizing on that value. And on one hand, they will tell you that only 2% of the athletes have any real value, which I dispute, and I think any reasonable economist would. But then they say, and if they're allowed their name, image, and likeness, we'll have bidding wars. Well, how could you have bidding wars if there's no value? This is a fairness issue, and I believe in it very strongly. I think you can go back, and this is the last thing I'll say, you can go back to 1984 when the Supreme Court ruled on the Board of Regents case, and the NCAA used to tell colleges how often they could be on television. And in their infinite wisdom at the time, they thought if you could be on television more often, fewer people will actually attend the games, and attendance will go down, and the enterprise will lose money as a result. When the Board of Regents case was decided 7-2 by the Supreme Court, and conferences and individual schools could go out and cut their own media rights deals, people actually came to Capitol Hill and said, this will destroy college sports. NCAA administration, this will destroy college sports. It wasn't true then, and frankly, it's not true now.
Thank you, Mr. Bilas. I know Senator Romney has another pressing obligation, so I wanted to bring in somebody who has the experience really being credited for turning around and revitalizing the Winter Olympics. I believe it's 2002 in Salt Lake City. Really has the understanding of the likeness and image that the Olympic model went through years ago, and we're grateful to have him. We'd love to hear a few thoughts from you, Senator.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm honored to be here, particularly sitting at a table with so many athletes. You look up here and you say, one of these things is not like the other. That would be me, one of those guys who was not a college athlete. And my perspective on the experience of college athletes has been built as a result of interaction with many, many athletes over the years. But for those that have no exposure to college athletes or what they're going through, there's a video you can see on Netflix or a series called Last Chance U that will give you a sense of what some of these athletes are going through. Something is badly awry in college athletics. When you have coaches, appropriately, in many cases, I'm sure, earning millions of dollars and billions of dollars associated with an activity, and yet you have student athletes who are sending home their lunch money so that their parents are able to eat and their families have a future, you know something is seriously awry. And I know there are people who think, well, we can hold this off, we're not going to make a change here, but the reality is Congress is going to act. We're coming for you. I mean, we're coming to help these young athletes of the future and the athletes of today make sure that they don't have to sacrifice their time and sacrifice, in many cases, their bodies without being fairly compensated. And what the Congress people have put forward is a very thoughtful and promising proposal regarding name, image, and likeness as a way of compensating some of these athletes. And I think that has a great deal of merit. I'm going to be, over the next couple of weeks, meeting with people on all sides of this issue and understanding their perspective and seeing whether this specific legislation is legislation I would foster in the Senate, or whether I make some adjustments or perhaps a different approach altogether. But I do believe that we have to take action, that we can't simply say to these young athletes, keep on practicing multiple hours a day, no time for homework, hardly the compensation in cases of many of these very, very impoverished athletes, no compensation to care for them, their families or themselves. It's simply not right. And so there are some concerns I know that are expressed. How do you make sure that we're treating fairly the athlete that's perhaps not as visible as the other athletes on the team? How do we help them? How do we make sure that certain schools don't get all the money and all the top performing athletes because of the potential that would be associated with going to one school versus another. These kinds of concerns are real. We can address them. As Jay has indicated, there were all sorts of worries last time around about a whole series of changes, and the world was going to come to an end for college sports. But you know what? It's just gotten better and better and better, and more people watch college sports and love them. And I'm convinced that we can adjust and we can address this extraordinary unfairness without in any way sacrificing the amateur nature of college sports or its attractiveness and impact on the American public. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. Before introducing Cedric, I want to go to Chairman Yarmouth. It really gets even away from the bio and talk about his reputation, someone who is a house leader when it comes to bipartisan issues, whether it's beneficial to Republicans or Democrats. His reputation is he does what's best for his constituents. I believe you're also a friend with former coach Denny Crum at Louisville, and we happen to be sitting in your budget room as well, so thank you for that. Would you share a few thoughts on this, Chairman?
Thank you very much, Mark. And
We'll use
Mark, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and thanks to everyone who's here. I started fighting the NCAA back when I was a staffer on the Senate side in the 70s. And I recognized then what I have recognized for the last 40 whatever years, that the NCAA is not an organization interested in fairness. They are an organization set up to exploit young men and women for money. And in this day and age, that is totally unacceptable. As Mark said, I'm a friend of Denny Crum's. I worked at the University of Louisville in the early 80s. Jay, I'm sorry to remind you of the University of Louisville in the 80s, but I remember one case which I think illustrates everything you need to know about why this is important. There was a young man who came to the University of Louisville in, I believe, 1979. His name was Derek Smith. Derek Smith was from a little town called Corinth, Georgia. He was one of these discoveries. Nobody knew who he was. That was before he had all the summer camps and where there were no secrets. He lived in a dirt road in a house with a dirt floor and no plumbing. When he came to the University of Louisville as a freshman, everything he owned was in a grocery bag. And it was a second pair of jeans and about a dozen t-shirts. That's all he came to the University of Louisville with. And here was someone who was supposed to join an elite program, who was on a team with Scooter and Rodney McRae, who came from a much more a wealthier background in Mount Vernon, New York. And here was a guy with nothing who was supposed to exist in a program where he couldn't possibly feel comfortable. And back then, you couldn't take any money for anything, couldn't take any clothes, you just did what you did. Fortunately for Derek, he played in three Final Four teams. He went to the NBA and made a nice life. He left school 13 hours short of a degree, came back, and got his degree later on, and unfortunately died in just a horrible sudden death in his mid-30s. But I never forget him and talking to Denny about how horrible Denny felt about what he was put through and how the rules prevented him from making any money. Because as we say, you can't work, you don't have time for anything else. This is the life for many of these athletes, and the NCAA should be an organization that prevents the exploitation of young men and women, not one that is structured to basically to exploit them. And so I've always had serious questions as to why the NCAA had a tax exemption anyway, because they really are a non-profit organization. They're a highly profitable organization. They exist to make money. So I think this approach that in this legislation is an appropriate one, and I commend once again Mark Walker for leading the charge on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Certainly my privilege, really my partner in all of this, Cedric Richmond, have a little chip on my shoulder. He and I are the starting pitchers, or were my first 4 years of Congress. He was pitching for the Democrats, and I was pitching for the Republicans, and he owned us about every year. And we developed a good friendship, and we began talking about this issue. So we came together on this piece of legislation, and really, if you pull back enough layers, not only is this an injustice, this is a civil rights issue that we need to be speaking about. Cedric Richmond is the former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and someone who brings a certain amount of background. He is an incredible athlete, went to Morehouse College, went to Tulane University, and also has his doctorates as well. So I'm very proud to consider him a partner in this as we move it forward. So Cedric, share a few thoughts, and then we'll start moving into our discussion.
Well, thank you, Mark, and I'll make mine very quick because I think the people who spoke before me did a very good job doing it. Let me just not only thank Mark for crafting this, but raising the issue. And I come at this through a bunch of unique lenses. First of all, I was a Little League coach from the time that I was 16 years old to the time I was elected to the United States Congress. I coached while I was in the legislature, I coached while I was in college. And I had great joy in getting kids placed into college. And hopefully in an ideal system, that's where the progress starts. Unfortunately, the way the system is, the struggle still continues for so many of them during college. And as a former coach and mentor to a lot of them, I would be the one to receive those calls about how well the university is doing, how others are doing so well, and how they are scraping up pennies and borrowing from families so that they can go to the movies and things like that. And so whether the exploitation is intentional or unintentional, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is these kids are being exploited, and it's a system to keep them dependent upon touching a basketball, a volleyball, a football, or even a golf club, because they're limited in the amount of money that they can make. They're limited in who they can work for. And it all comes back to you being on that campus, going to practice, and still expected to be a real student athlete, so that if you're one of the overwhelming majority that will not go pro in your sport, that you are equipped for a lifetime of success. And so this issue, and it's, what it really boils down to is giving our young men and women the ability to take part of their future into their own hands, as opposed to having others think for them. So I remember being at Morehouse College, and not that we had a whole bunch of scholarships or any money to do anything with, but I remember the rules. There were rules of what I could and could not do. My brother was down the street at Georgia Tech on an academic scholarship. The school could pay him for being on an academic scholarship, but because there's a sports scholarship involved, then students couldn't get paid or income or otherwise. And I think that as we look through the system, and look, nobody's trying to ruin the NCAA, people just want to be fair. And what the students do right now, the benefit that they give the schools, allow the schools to pay their coaches multi-million-dollar contracts. They allow the schools to invest in their facilities. A lot of these college stadiums now see over 100,000 people. Those people are going into those stands. The 100,000 plus that show up there are going because of the players on that field. And so we just believe that we need to start this conversation. We don't think it's going to be easy. We don't think it's convenient. But what we do believe is that it's necessary. And if we can't come together in a manner by choice, then sometimes it takes a little force to get people to the table to understand how serious the issue is. And that's why I'm so glad that Mark brought this legislation, and why we have so many people here that are talking about it. So thank you very much, Mark, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Cedric. Before we open it up on the panel, we've got 20 minutes to have a discussion and do about 20 minutes of questions. Let's look at the numbers for a second, if we could, please. If you look at the student athlete population, somewhere in the mid 450, 460,000. Of that student athlete population, maybe 40 to 50% of them have some kind of scholarship. I won't break it down, get too much in the weeds. You know, Division II, Division III has no scholarships. But the student athlete is the only population that is locked away from any access to the free market. They are the only people on campus that literally has to sign a document saying, I have no access to my own name, image, or likeness for the next 4 or 5 years, or however long I'm part of this institution. A music scholarship can go out and play in a gig, play the band for a gig. Education can go tutor business. And not only is it limiting in the scope of the field, but for the 99% of these student athletes who will never receive a single dollar from a sports contract, it is restrictive on their own future. If they're pursuing business, the other students can go work and get a business internship or have access to that. The student athlete cannot. They are prohibited based on that document that they have signed. And that's what we have been working with the NCAA, trying to work with the NCAA. I first met Mr. Bilas a couple years ago, met him in Charlotte. I heard that he was concerned about this issue. My background, working in inner cities as a pastor for 16 years, running music and sports camps in places like Cleveland and New York, Baltimore, I have seen some of the impoverished communities. And here's a number that the NCAA doesn't like to talk about. In the sports making, or these college sports that bring in revenue, such as big-time college basketball, college football, more than 40% of these student athletes come from impoverished communities. So for many of these students, their family's still struggling to pay the light bill. We're talking about how much do you want to pay down versus going to school, if you want to pay it all in one lump sum or spread installments or whatever it might be. And for these student athletes who are adults, to be the only part of our community that's restricted from the free market is an injustice. And that's why, not to try to create too much hyperbole, that's why I've listed this as a civil rights issue. What other genre do you tell someone that we basically own your name and your likeness over the next 4 or 5 years? Now, the NCAA, if you remember the statement that they put out after the California legislation passed, and I applaud them because it's really brought this to consider focus here, is that the last statement, and I think I'm getting this pretty much verbatim, is that they said, we don't believe that the student athletes should be employees of the university. Well, who's asking that? There's this smoke and mirror misdirection there. Nobody at this point in any legislation that I've seen have asked for them to be employees. You can make a case that even why is that even an issue? But what we're basically saying is it's time to remove the ban or the moratorium that these student athletes are forced to sign. Listen, NCAA, you keep your $1 billion that you made last year, the university, Texas, Alabama. I'm a huge college sports fan. I love it. You keep rolling. All we're saying is allow these student athletes to have access to the free market like every other citizen does. And that's why we're driving this. That's why we're glad that Mr. Bilas and other members have come out today to continue to bring awareness to this issue. Listen, whatever, Cedric and I, we pull this legislation tomorrow if the NCAA would be willing to come to the table, but we feel like they've given us no choice at this point, to your words, Dr. Lopiano, that we almost have to drag them to the table because they have promised year after year that they would address such an egregious situation, but they refuse to do that. So what we're trying to do is say, listen, we're paying attention to this on a federal level. Last point I'll make before we open it up. People say, well, why can't individual states do this? Well, I'm talking to probably a very versed group of people who understand college sports. I'll give you an example. All my family are from Alabama, huge Crimson Tide fans. When I was little, I was told Bear Bryant wasn't a god, but he wasn't one of us. So that's how we grew up. But with that, when you look at some of the sports situations, you look at it from the perspective that is this a fairness component? Is this an aspect that everybody is being treated in this land of opportunity? And it's not. But if each state can set their own rules, Alabama has this 5-star running back. He starts, his name's Najee Harris, incredible strong guy, right? So Nick Saban, as he does, recruits out of state sometimes, and he brought this young man in, fine young man from California. If California has a law that you can have access to the free market through your name, image, and likeness, and Alabama or Louisiana does not, then you have a whole different set of problems and unfair recruiting processes. That's why, as much as I applaud states like California and South Carolina and Colorado is looking at it, that's why it has to be resolved on a federal level as one as opposed to the state, and I think most of you understand that's why. So, with that, thank you again, Senator Romney, for coming out. I know you've got obligations. I want to open up to inside the panel here first, and then we're going to open up some questions as well. I want to start with Mr. Sullivan. I talked about this a little bit. I think you referenced that you may have some numbers on this, because I'm still seeing that when the NCAA or other people refer to this, I would say mistakenly, intentionally, unintentionally, as pay to play, this is not pay to play. This is having access to your image and likeness. But you're saying you're seeing some numbers that this is maybe swinging in one direction. Would you address that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I don't think this is pay for play. Pay for play, semantically, as people sort of tend to describe it, is the university paying athletes for their services. In this particular case, it would be college athletes making money off their own image and likeness from outside endorsements from, if Nike wants to provide money, if a car dealership wants to provide money for advertising. I do think public opinion has changed a lot, particularly in the past decade. We give a lot of credit to Ed O'Bannon's lawsuit that came in 2009, really brought a lot of awareness to the issue, because there was a very popular video games, college football and college basketball. They were using the images of players. You knew Ed O'Bannon was that figure in that game. It was his bald head, it was his number, it was UCLA, and they weren't getting paid for it. The trial brought out, I think, a lot of issues and uncovered a lot of contracts, a lot of testimony. For instance, even an executive at EA Sports testified that if we could pay the players for use of their images in these video games, we would. But because of NCAA rules, they did not.
No.
Just jump in here. This is kind of a free-for-all as far as talking about some of this as we kind of go into Dr. Lupiano.
Yeah, just let me say a little bit about this whole notion of who's going to benefit too. Think of all of those athletes who are coming out of the Olympic Games with gold medals, who are in a small window of opportunity. I don't care if it's track star or Katie Ledecky or Missy Franklin. They have a 2-year, 3-year period of life where they can profit off of their name and image, name, image, and likeness. And what they're faced with is, what? Do I stop? Do I not go to college? Do I give up all these things? And their lifespan for earnings is gone. So you should think of that. The other point on pay for play is that the college, and this is where Representative Walker is absolutely on point, colleges and universities are tax-exempt educational institutions. We may argue otherwise, but they cannot operate like professional sports entities and pay athletes like professional sports. However, they can do the things that provide them with compensation that are educationally tethered, and the courts have reinforced this. So they can, very few students in our society leave college without debt. Athletes do, if they're on full scholarship. So we can maximize what their educational coin is, and we can say, on top of this, here are your third-party earnings without turning the educational institution into professional sports. And what we have to ask the educational institution to do that they haven't been doing to date is taking care of athlete health. Where are the long-term insurance policies for kids who are going to see concussion reactions 10 years from now? Where are the protections for these students down the line? So in addition to athletic scholarships, we've got to install a whole new set of health protections for these youngsters. There's plenty to spend that money on, but Congress is probably going to be the one to say, you have to do it, because they're not going to do it on their own.
Thank you, Mr. Bilas, and whoever else wants to.
Just a couple things. First, on some of the court rulings, including O'Bannon and the most recent Jenkins case, there's nothing in those court rulings that restrict the NCAA or member schools from providing name, image, and likeness rights, or even paying them if they choose to change their rules. The NCAA has not proven thus far that they are amenable to changing their rules, but they can change their rules tomorrow if they want to allow name, image, and likeness, and even to allow pay if they so chose. So the tethered education part that Dr. Lupiano is referring to is in those specific rulings in a little bit of a different context. But one of the things about the outside money from name, image, and likeness, I think you'll hear from the NCAA that they're concerned about recruiting, that could lead to sort of this boogeyman of arranged deals in recruiting, that somehow, even though he just recently passed away, someone like T. Boone Pickens or Phil Knight of Nike could just throw endorsement deals and throw money at players in recruiting. And I don't believe that's a reasonable concern. First of all, T. Boone Pickens never threw egregious money at the coach all these years, and nor did Phil Knight. So they didn't overpay for a coach to get Nick Saban or Roy Williams or Mike Krzyzewski or whomever you want to put in there. The other part is that the universities would not lose money if name, image, and likeness were granted to players. In fact, in my judgment, there would be new revenue streams that would be opened up to the universities through group licensing, where they could actually market their teams and help bring money across the board to their athletes. And lastly, there is an issue that the NCAA brings all the time about equity and fairness, as if, and you're asked the question, well, what about the quarterback versus the offensive lineman? What about the best player on the team versus the worst player on the team? How do we deal with that? And as if they all get the same amount of minutes in a game, that our fairness goes to that. That doesn't happen. We don't ask those questions. They know exactly whom to recruit and exactly whom to put in the game when they need to win, and they're not worried about fairness in those issues. The free market will take care of all of those things. And if they were really worried about fairness, there would be scholarships across the board, and there are not. Most sports that are offered restrict the amount of scholarships that can be given. I think in baseball, there's 11 scholarships for a roster of 50, things like that. So fairness has never been a great concern in this.
Whether you're, Jay, to your point, whether you're on scholarship or not, the same rules apply to you as a student athlete, whether you're receiving a scholarship. Mr. Briggs, I'm going to real quick, and then I'm going to open it up to our people who are participating today for any questions there.
Well, the only thing I push back on is it was said earlier that student athletes don't leave college oftentimes with student loan debt. And while that may be true, I will say that they often leave college with a huge deficit. That deficit comes in some of the things that were mentioned earlier on this panel. The inability to have internships, the inability to participate in job opportunities, the inability to participate in things like studying abroad, the inability to afford some of these things often leave them with deficits that they have to spend years trying to overcome, just like their fellow students at those same universities have to spend years trying to overcome the student loan debt that they received while they were matriculating through those institutions. Well, one of the things I would give to the room and to the folks watching this after we're done here today as a bit of homework, since we're talking about education stuff, go out and talk to some of the student athletes that you know, former student athletes, and ask them what majors they could not take because they were student athletes. Things that conflicted with their practices, things that they wanted to do from the time they were 8 years old, but when they got to a college campus found out that the practice that they had to attend in order to be able to be paid through a scholarship to attend this university, now they had to do that instead of what they always dreamed of. And talk to them about what the deficit is that they experienced in their lives because they weren't able to actualize those dreams that they had simply because of a rule that was not only forced on them when they signed their national letter of intent, but continued to be enforced against them while they were there. And the restrictions that those placed not only on their lives as student athletes, but the restrictions it placed on their lives thereafter. Many guys that I know that I played football with, that I've worked with as NFL players, since becoming a lawyer at the NFL Players Association, have talked to me about how they wanted to be an engineer, but all the labs were in the afternoon. So was football practice. So I ended up being a sociology major. Or I wanted to be a computer scientist, but all the labs were in the afternoon. So I ended up being a PE teacher. Or I ended up majoring in something else that I didn't care about. So the reason why we're concerned about name, likeness, and image rights are because maybe this will be another way that players can find better protection in this entire system. And that's one of the things that I think as a part of this conversation needs to be talked about.
And everything that you just listed there is the real pay to play. The way we make the athletes pay and sacrifice for the chance to play for their school, for the sake of school's pride, and then come out with debt and all the deficits that Mr. Briggs here mentioned, that's the real pay to play.
Let me just, and I'm glad Joe brought it up, because we see it in Congress. I mean, the NFL Players Association, they do a great job of bringing their athletes, NFL players, during the off season, so that they can come and intern and get an experience on Capitol Hill. And that's something that most young men would do if they were interested while they're in their college years. But they can't do it because their summers are far too often occupied with football. Let me just give two things before we just completely open up. One of the reasons you hear sometimes that they don't want the student athlete having to make decisions like that, because they don't know if they'll make the best decision. Well, you know, first of all, it's offensive to start with. But two, they let any non-athlete make those decisions. First of all, they let them saddle themselves with enormous student debt that they'll take lifetimes to pay off. But 18-year-olds can make a decision to go serve this country and put their lives on the line. And I think that we need to stop acting like our college athletes are not capable of doing it. And then the last thing I think that this bill overall sums up is that where there's the will, there's a way. And if the NCAA wanted to make this fair, if they wanted to protect the student athletes and look at their long-term well-being, if they wanted to give them their image and likeness and their name to monetize, they could find a way to do it. And they could find a million ways to make it fair, to make it equitable, to take care of the player that's the star player, take care of the player that's at practice every day on the scout team. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, the NCAA has proven unwilling to address this in a serious manner in which it should be addressed. And therefore, we were forced to act because of their inaction. And so, we're going to continue to act. And the truth is, we will use any and every avenue that we have to bring them to the table, to make them understand the seriousness of this issue for so many people.
And one note add that the NCAA was unavailable today to participate. That's where it's at. Okay, we're going to open it up to you guys. If you have any comments or questions, if you would just give us your name and who you represent, and we'll go from there and do our best to try to keep our panel. We can keep our answers to maybe about 30 seconds to a minute. That would allow more opportunities. Yes, sir.
Just real quick on
Your name is?
Jake McGee. I played college at University of Virginia and then master's student grad transfer to University of Florida. As a player that had his jersey sold in the stands, was on a billboard, not the city that college was in, but my hometown, was on posters, just on behalf of a group that really doesn't have a voice. I want to thank you guys for representing us and speaking up for us.
Thank you very much. One of the things I have said, you know, I had the privilege of representing the largest HBCU in the country, Aggie Pride, and it had two the last 3 years, national champs. Well, Nike may not be knocking on the door or whatever, Adidas or Apple, but somewhere in their hometown, just like you mentioned, you have a marketability. It may be the local restaurants that wants to pay you a couple $100 for appearance fee on a Saturday morning whenever you can show up. That's not NCAA's business. That belongs to you. And for those 450,000 student athletes that we're talking, you know, the Zion Williamsons, the Michael Jordan, the Baker Mayfield, they're going to get theirs because of their track. This is about voicing and standing up for the other 400-something thousand, the 99.4% who never get the access, that bust their rear end on a volleyball court or a basketball gym or a football field for 40, 50 hours a week if you count the voluntary part of it, the weight training. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's not officially on the clock, but you're having there to compete at that level. This legislation, or any legislation, the principle of it behind it is to be an advocate for those whose rights are being violated, what I feel like unfairly by the NCAA. Panel, anybody else want to add to that? All right, we'll take another question. Yes, sir.
My name is Melvin Forbes. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the Minor Football League, and I also represent Bobby Wilkerson and Ken Benson from Indiana Hoosiers. Mm-hmm. And they found out about this, and they just wanted me to convey, first of all, it was way past time, because their time has passed. But they are glad that someone is now stepping up to show that there should be parity, and at least given the opportunity that students who are human beings and a product have been exploited for years. So we thank you for having the sagacity, perspicacity to do this, number one. But they want me to convey that they would love to come and participate in any kind of way as well. So thank you both. And Jay, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
So my name's Kendall Spencer. I'm a third-year law student at Georgetown. I was a national champion in track and field. I'm a long jumper, and I'm currently training for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things you guys mentioned. I think this conversation is much needed and incredibly important. Part of the issue that I've had with some of the discussion outside of this room is that a lot of commentators have made this so much about the NCAA and about sort of breaking down that model that we've sort of forgotten about the welfare of student athletes. And my issue with that is this. What some of the conversation has neglected to talk about is the time demands that this could potentially put on student athletes, right? And also the current framework for which this right would be exercised, right? So we're talking about this right of publicity. Well, right now we're living in a highly digitized economy, right? So when I go and advertise myself, I'm not putting a poster on my school, bulletin board. I'm going to Instagram. The issue with that is social media platforms aren't regulated, which means they can sublicense your content on these platforms, and that money doesn't actually come to you. They can really do whatever they want with that because you don't have an exclusive right over the content you put over those mediums. So when we look at the issues with technology that currently aren't being discussed, that's part of the red flag. The other part is time demands, as I was saying earlier. You had mentioned earlier about, right now, student athletes already have over 50 hours a week given to athletic activity. And right now, we would be asking them to then go in and make sure they monitor the use of their name, image, and likeness, because realistically, the value on your name, image, likeness is only going to be as valuable as you can make sure that it's regulated and make sure that it's not misappropriated by people that don't have that type of permission. And if you're not doing it, well, let's be honest, I'm gonna hire somebody else to do it. Agents aren't cheap, nor are lawyers, because we live in a framework where the right of publicity is a state-to-state right, so I have to make sure that I'm complying with the law as well. Can you speak to what this looks like in the technology community and for time demands?
Happy to do that. I'm gonna let Jay give a couple examples that references of what you're talking about, and I'll come back and talk about the digital side, YouTube, and some other things there.
Yeah.
Well, first on the time demands, those are all fair points. My response would be that the athlete is free to say no if the demands are too great. I trust college athletes to be able to determine what's best for them, not the NCAA, because the demands on their time aren't too great for them to go on road trips and to step forward and do press conferences after games that the NCAA sanctions, and in fact, during the NCAA tournament are mandatory for players. So I think the players can handle their time just fine. As to the use of their name, image, and likeness and policing the use of it, there are reasons that those are policed. It's because there's money on the other end of that as well. That if your name, image, and likeness is misappropriated, you have an action for that, a legal action. So I don't think it would be of great cost to the athlete. Listen, I mentioned before that I believe this would open up new revenue streams for the universities as well as for the athletes. So to me, right now we have an underground economy in college sports, and we've had that for decades upon decades. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any championship that was won in a major sport, a money sport, where there weren't ineligible players at some level that were involved. Whether they were discovered or not is another matter. But I'm not concerned about those issues. I think they're valid to bring up and discuss, but I don't think that they would be such that we'd say, you know what, I don't think we can trust the athletes with their name, image, and likeness because it's too expensive or there are too many demands on their time, when the other demands are put on by the NCAA and by the member institutions.
Yeah, I will add to that, in the digital age that we live in, I would make the point that it's probably the best time to be able to market yourself with YouTube channels, obviously the social media platforms, and I'll let Chairman and Yarmouth and Cedric weigh in if they want to. I'm not in the business from a federal standpoint to come in and tell a nonprofit how they need to run a nonprofit. What we are in the business of is when we feel like people's rights are being violated, then it's our job to speak out. We wouldn't be here today if the NCAA would have taken the initiative to correct this issue. This, what attention-wise is a growing issue, to Mr. Solomon's point. That's what we're trying to convince the NCAA to do, is resolve this issue. This is a first step in the process. That's why we're trying to draft simple legislation that only creates the first step that say you are violating the literal civil rights of this adult American. You fix it. Now, we may have to come in and way back in later. That's not my goal. But we would love for them, and I'm not trying to lead them on what they need to do, but they want to come back and say, okay, student athletes can have access to the image and likeness, they just can't wear our branding. Okay, maybe that's a solution. But do something. Move on something as opposed to this stubborn, obstinate stonewalling that they have done. And in fact, when I first talked about this with Jay a couple years ago, he warned me, saying the first thing they'll do is they will tell you that they're going to resolve this in the next meeting, and that's exactly what has happened. They've had 2 or 3 meetings since then, and nothing's been resolved. And that's what we're trying to do, is, as Cedric eloquently said, get them to the table at whatever we have to do to make sure that we're bringing some fairness. Let me, a couple more and then we'll wrap it up.
If I could,
Go ahead.
2 things I would mention in response to your questions. First, that the National Collegiate Players Association has to be mentioned as a part of this conversation. Ramogi Huma and the work that they've done on this issue, helping California pass Assembly Bill 206, and the advocacy that they've done on behalf of student athletes across the country needs to have more recognition than it does. So I would say to you that many of the questions you've asked are parts of the platform that the National Collegiate Players Association has been advocating for, figuring out how they can do better about student athletes' time constraints and also the use of likeness and image, especially in the digital platform. So I would ask that you look into Ramogi and the National Collegiate Players Association. Second, and apart from that, while the technology issues that you bring up are valid, not to take anything away from your question, stars, music stars, rap stars, NFL players all use some of those same platforms. Many as loss leaders, so that they can get their names and likeness and image into the marketplace and then use that as a way to not only build a market, but also establish that that market has value. Using that same platform, collegiate athletes could potentially do the same thing. What we see now, and what you've probably seen as a track star running through the college ranks, some high school athletes come to their colleges with hundreds of thousands of followers already. What I think the people writing this legislation and advocating for this legislation are saying is that has value. I should not have to sign that value away to someone else. Instead, I should be able to allow someone, if they wanted to manage that value for me and then monetize that value once we get there. That's what we do for our NFL players at the Players Association. Cassidy, who's sitting right behind you, is one of the great social media folks and communications folks, doing that on behalf of the 2,000 players in the National Football League every day.
Thank you, Joe. 2 more questions and a couple closing comments here. Yes, sir, on the front, and then this gentleman here will wrap up this.
Yes, Clyde McGrady, I'm with Roll Call.
Okay.
This question is primarily for Mr. Bilas, but anybody, please jump in. Why do you think the NCAA would rather risk this kind of, underground economy with all the potential for scandals and violations rather than just say people can make money?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I do believe it is one of control. I don't think it's anything sinister. I mean, there are wonderful people within the NCAA structure, both in Indianapolis and every member institution. It's the way it's been for a long time, but it sort of strains the mind that there's almost a belief that well, wait a minute, we're doing this for the benefit of the athlete. All this stuff goes to the benefit of the athlete. Look what they get. They get all this great training, and they get these great facilities, and they get travel to games and all these things. They get free gear, and like, what they get is limited. That's what they get that no one else gets. They get limited to their expenses only, expenses that are incidental to their participation in the sport. And everything that the NCAA claims to provide for them is done to enhance their performance. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But if, just like I mentioned with the stipend, which would have been seen as a horrible violation of NCAA rules 5 years ago, if the NCAA said tomorrow, we will give full name, image, and likeness rights to all of our players across the board, men and women at all levels. The world would not spin off its axis. College sports would go on just fine. It is not an existential threat, and not a single fan would turn away. No fan turned away when Dabo Swinney signed his $10 million contract with Clemson. And nobody asked, well, what about women's sports? What about the wrestling program? what sports will be cut because Dabo's making this and Coach K's making that and Saban's making that. They don't ask that. When they build these gigantic facilities, which, hey, they're great, that's a choice in the marketplace to make. The athletes should be allowed more, and I felt that since I was a player in the mid-'80s and voiced it. And I think now, even the NCAA can't justify what's going on, given the disparity between the athlete and literally everyone else.
Yes, sir.
Congressman, SB 206 moved ahead relatively quickly, got signed relatively quickly, but it actually doesn't go into effect until January of 2023. What type of timetable are you looking at for bringing this forward? Do you expect the same type of bipartisan support that SB 206 had? And how quickly could it be implemented once and if it's approved?
Two great questions to end on, and that's absolutely.
Oh, by the way, I'm Artie Burko with ESPN.
For Marty, nice to
Artie.
Artie, good to see you today.
Worked with Jay a few
Jay
times.
before, exactly right. I wish that in the House of Representatives we could predict some of the timeframes. Me personally, I believe, and John, you said you're taking the wheel as you can. I believe if we were able to get this bill to the floor, that it would pass the House. Now, not to get too much in the weeds, is this particular piece of legislation, if we want to understand, is a change in the tax code and amateur status, which normally goes to the Ways and Means that deals with that kind of ruling. So the Ways and Means has to take it up, passes committee, goes to rules, the House floor, passes the House, simple majority goes to the Senate, simple majority then goes to the President and sign the law. Personally, I would like to see that happen by spring. I was a little concerned about it when we dropped it, Cedric and I did about 6 months ago, because there was a little bit of buzz about it, but what California has done is kind of lit the fire under it. So I'm hoping that our colleagues, and one of the reasons that Jay and others have been benevolent with their time today, is to bring awareness of why this needs to be resolved. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an individual rights issue. And I think that's why I'm hoping that through all this party, that we can fast forward this process. We met with the ranking member Kevin Brady today, looking forward at some point to talking with the chairman as well of the Ways and Means, and hopefully that he is willing to see the concerns that we have. If we can get it there, then we can grease the skids. I was amazed that it passed 72-0, I believe was the number, in California. That says a lot, and I'm hoping that, I don't think you ever get anything maybe unanimous anymore in the House of Representatives, but I think once people understand the issue, the partisanship should be set aside and say, let's do what's best for the American people. Cedric, Chairman, you want to add anything to that? Or?
No, I echo exactly what you said. I think this is a bipartisan issue. As you see, Mark and I have very little in common, at least from outside appearances. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I'm black, he's not. But this issue is really an issue about fairness, and what we see is young people being taken advantage of. And it's about empowering them to make better decisions, and also calling upon the NCAA to find, their own inner angel to really look at how to help the student athlete. And let me just say, your question about the digital platform. I represent New Orleans with a bunch of young artists. In terms, my wife is on the board at our School of Performing Arts, where the kids are playing music and making money and still in high school. My little son is killing me on YouTube because he watches Ryan, some little kid on YouTube who plays with toys and makes a bunch of money.
Yes.
The question becomes, if Ryan becomes an outstanding golfer and goes to college to play golf, he now has to sign away his likeness and image. And the question becomes, is that fair? And so the hope is that while in this session we can do two things and more than two things at one time, that this can be one of the things on the agenda that we can push forward, because we believe that we need to act, especially right now with the California law lingering out there, because we don't want California exposed as the only state. We know there are others that are doing it, but there's safety in numbers, and you can't isolate athletes and schools from one state if we get involved on the federal level.
I truly believe the NCAA is watching what kind of traction that we get on this, and I think it's going to be beneficial if we continue to build on it. Panel, any closing comments? We've got about 7 or 8 minutes before we have a hard stop and a meeting with another chairman here in the House. Any final comments from anybody that would like to address anything? Mr. Miles?
Yes, as I stated earlier, this is well overdue, and the athletes got to understand in college, you know, you're only relevant because of what you're doing out there. And if you are the NCAA getting away with it, just like anybody else, you know, people only do what you allow them to do. And if you don't say anything, they'll keep doing what they're doing. So I got to commend you for doing this, you know, take this opportunity up. And, you know, whatever we can do to reinforce things, and hopefully all the other states will jump in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. Anybody else?
I got one.
Sure.
Two things. One is, one thing we haven't talked about here is the relevance of this to the athletes' families. I remember with a lot of these young people coming to college, and they come from families that don't have anything, and can't support them. And this is revenue that they could use even for something as simple as allowing a parent to come and watch their kid play the game they play. I remember the University of Louisville until I think 2 years ago, Jay, you probably know this, I think it was until Rick left, Gino left, was the most profitable basketball program in the country. And yet we had players, and I knew them well, whose parents did not come to see them play. And that's just insane. There was nothing anybody could do without violating the rules. So that's one thing. As to about partisanship, the only time I've ever been involved in anything, this was back in the 70s, so a totally different era. But I think the NCAA was even more, in terms of its power, political power, was probably stronger then than it is now. And we had a thing where we were trying to get them to, the NCAA to relent on the rule. And we had everybody back then in the Senate from Ted Kennedy to Barry Goldwater. Virtually everybody in between. So I think there's a lot of potential there to have significant bipartisan effort.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to say thank you all for coming out today. You're part of this solution. I'd like to thank the panel as well. Don't want to add histrionics to it, but I'm hoping this is a historical day in the sense of the beginning to correct this issue that's been, as you said, been going on for far too long. Again, thank you so much. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.